Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man for whom it has been 30 days since he crossed through the mysterious gate, which opened in the Varnal Hills, and thus found himself in this strange and uncharted land.
Tim Longo.
Yep.
It's a mystery to know when to come in on.
I tell you, when I'm taking it from. I was going to call it fan fiction, but that's unfair because, of course, it's their game, so it's their fiction. It's not fan fiction.
In the manual, right?
In the manual, yeah.
I did look at that,
yeah.
The letters.
I did too, because I was wondering. So in the end, we might as well get right into it. We're talking about Heroes of Might and Magic. In the end, what I wanted those pages to be. When I got to that, the reason why I was reading some of them, and I basically skimmed
the letters. You mean
the letters? Yeah, is I wanted some strategy guidance. I was looking to see if there was anything in there, and I actually found a point where he's talking about how he was going to ransom this hero. I'm like, wow, you can ransom guys? And then I went and looking back, I'm like, there's no mechanic for that. I think this is just flavor. And at that point, I was like, well, what is the use of this?
Lore
reasons. I know it gets, might get people into the headspace of the game and all of that, but like it did not have anything. The manual had very little in it that prepared me for the game I was going to play, other than literally here's what the buttons are. And very Same. Little.
I did eventually look
here's how to think about the game. And I had read some of the manual before, and I went back to it thinking, well, maybe I missed something, because there was that whole section at the end. But when I went and looked at it, I was like, oh, that's right. This is why I didn't read it. Lore reasons. So, but when I say lore reasons, it's usually why I'm not bothering, not the other way around. So
lore reasons, to give credit where credit is due. That's from the Waypoint, right?
It is. Yeah, that came from Waypoint. Yeah.
Yeah. The podcast, which is no longer.
No, there's no Waypoint anymore. That vertical was closed.
Yep. Bad, sad stuff. Yep. Yeah. Good crew. I'm forgetting the person's name that came
Austin Walker?
No, Austin and Patrick, but
was it Danielle? Maybe.
No, it was the other one that was there. Shoot, I feel bad now, but she was the one that actually came up with. She was kind of the lore reasons person that they always would joke with. I'll find her name. Oh, okay. Anyway, she wasn't there the whole time, but she was good. She is good. Anyway, I mean, so, our up top, our first admission is that, I don't know what we call this class of game, but there's a category, and I'm thinking of the Kaon interview we talked about last week. There's a class of game for our podcast. Maybe I'll call it the injustice games. The games of injustice, to make it sound more dramatic. That, we bite off more than we can chew for this weekly, by the way, podcast. Where we're trying to juggle life and the things, and I'll call them out. We know the Mega Mans.
I'll throw another one out there. I think we gave Grand Theft Auto 3 short shrift. We did actually get email to that effect. Not that we didn't play enough of it, but that we didn't see enough of what made it such a big thing. That what people found fun in it. It didn't appeal to us. We should have not. I pushed to play that one. I should not have, because I should have known how we were going to react to it.
You mean because of how critical we were?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That we didn't really we kind of kept on that part of it and dwelled on that, and never kind of got to like, okay, yeah, but if we could not look at that part of it and just look at the systems and the whatever.
Biased. We were blinded by it and didn't actually enjoy the.
It was early in our career of doing this thing, so if you can call it a career.
Early, mid. I don't know. I feel like it wasn't.
It was like in the first 2 years.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take the criticism. I think that's one thing, whether people like it or not. It has come up from time to time. We're already off track, but I'm going to keep going.
Keep going.
It's come up from time to time, but I don't know if it's like part of our recipe that we accidentally, like, we didn't intentionally do it, but part of our recipe is, I think we are going to get blinded by some of that stuff because we're going to bring it up. We can't not bring it up.
Yeah.
In GTA's case. And because of, I'll speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure you agree, because of our, I don't know, I don't want to say passion's not the right word, but because of our attention to those kinds of topics, like, it's not, I have a hard time separating the old art from the artist debate. It's like, there's times when, no, I can't, it's going to blind me. And yes, I know mechanically, whatever you get in, if you turn a blind eye to some of that stuff and just look at the basics, there's brilliance there. And of course there are, because it's launched a whole genre, still to this day. And so, yeah, but there's just certain things. Yeah. So,
yeah,
I mean,
I would say it's sensitivities, not even attention. We're way more sensitive to it now, but even back then, I mean, that was not I really meant to play, like, I went in thinking I would play all of Grand Theft Auto 4 when it came out, or maybe, within a year after it coming out. And I, I got to a certain point, I was like, oh no, it's like they've zigged on the story. It's not at all what I thought it was, and I don't want to be part of it anymore. Because I basically had the same sort of visceral reaction. Anyway, we're off on the Grand Theft Auto.
Well,
but we have a similar problem here. It's just different. It's not a sensitivity to the content. It's to the difficulty and opacity.
The commitment. Yeah, there's a commitment. Yeah. And I think, thank goodness, in Final Fantasy Tactics case, you were obsessed with that enough to play it and do it justice. And I was not, right? I didn't have the time to devote to it. And I do know that in my case, I did that one injustice, even though I still think it's my favorite Final Fantasy game, even though I didn't even make it out of chapter 2 or something, because of reasons I said. Go back and listen to that series if you haven't. But Mega Man's, that's like a commitment of expertise that you need to double down on, which I totally appreciate after watching Kaon play it. And we didn't have a chance to do that, and maybe return someday. Dwarf Fortress, one that Artemis brings up, which I agree with him on. It's like, that is a hundreds of hours of game, that to really, like, understand how it really ticks. I am glad that we went all the way back and played all the versions, which was, I think, a really cool experience for me. But at least playing the last version more deeply was missed. And then I had another one on my mind that people are yelling at their podcast listener.
Yeah, I mean, we often run across things that go way deeper than we have time for. I mean, I even think, as much time as we spent on The Sims, there was a lot more there.
Yeah, Sims is a good one. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
But it's funny because it's a game like this that we, it's just a series we've both known about, but neither of us had real exposure to, and we really blindsided. We played ourselves, Tim, is what happened here.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. We went in very, like, I went in very cavalierly and nonchalantly, like, oh yeah, it's one of those, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of, like, I
mean, we're just justifying
we've never
choices
said
at this point.
Yeah, one of the things we've shied away from doing because of this is fighting games and racing games. With the case of fighting games, it's like, we know that you have to train yourself to learn all these complicated movesets, and then differentiating, knowing, doing that, and then being able to differentiate the one you're playing from the others series of things, like a Street Fighter and a Mortal Kombat and a whatever, Capcom, etc. Like, I'm probably already insulted somebody because that's how little I know about fighting games. We're never going to do. And the same with racing games. It's like, well, to get the fine points out of racing games, does also feel like a real commitment, and it's, for me, it's not something I'm super interested. And then I guess sports games are another one.
I was going to mention sports games too,
because you in particular, are not a sports person. And as much as I appreciate some sports, I can't remember the last time I touched a sports game and it's never been something I've been interested in. And I've never been good at them either. So it's they're not bad for playing, on the couch with somebody else, I guess. But to just kind of sit down and try to master a sports game is not a thing I would ever do.
I think to be analytical about all three of those genres too is the other thing. It's like we want to do. Yeah, I think we strive to do things to do justice to things, and we fall short for sure, and we have multiple times.
And we will again.
Yeah. With best intentions, but yeah, I guess it's a topic we wanted to hit a little bit because it's come to a head with this one too. But yeah, and I've thought about, I think we've even talked to some folks about it who wanted us to especially play Smash Brothers or something. That I've thought about this a little bit. We've talked about it some, I think, in the past, that I wonder if there's a way that we can kind of do a bit of a hybrid where we do a little bit of a dive on one of these genres, but we have a guest come in who is already not necessarily somebody who worked on the game, but somebody we know who loves fighting games and can talk very intelligently. Another developer, about them, because I have friends who are, obsessed with those genres. Other ones, like, we don't play a lot of multiplayer games, right? MOBAs, as an example, we probably.
I can't do the CPMs. I can't do it.
Yeah. Well, luckily most MOBAs have like a PvE mode, so you can get some of the basics there. But, talking about what you need to talk about with a MOBA, you need to really kind of go deep, and you need to know the real, like, the nuance to things. To what makes, in my opinion, I dabble in them. I'm not an expert, but I do play them from time to time, and to talk about what's really makes them special. You
never
really
touch
your stuff.
Never touch one. I mean, my PC gaming was kind of where I was in the 90s. And then, around 2001, I switched to consoles, and pretty much that was it. So, I mean, I've just not played those things at all. So, yeah, I have weird gaps in my history as well. So, yeah. So when it comes to something like a Mega Man, I was thinking about it because of our discussion last week. Like, I didn't really have a period like that when I was a kid where I had loads of time and a console and a game that was like that was difficult. Mm-hmm. I had an Apple II, and I had games like, I don't know, Lode Runner and text adventures and some other things, like role-playing games, like a Wizardry or whatever. But, like, I never had that kind of growing up SNES or NES on the table, on the TV, with something that you're just going to spend all your time trying to get through. So, I don't know. Yeah, just it's not an experience I had. So it's, I do get obsessed with games, now, and have over the last, 20 years or whatever, but it's usually a little different, than that. And they're usually not as opaque. So
I did have an NES, and I did have some of those games that you do become obsessed with, but even back then, I remember being frustrated with the difficulty and not, maybe it's an impatience thing or whatever, but not having the fortitude to master it. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the people do that love those games. And I actually did back in the day, as it would have been, I'm trying to think of which console. I mean, definitely on the NES. It must have been, I guess it would have been Mega Man 2. I remember playing those back then, but I think I had just as many frustrations. So it's like, it's player type stuff, I guess, to some degree. But for the podcast, I would like to think we push a little bit harder sometimes against our comfort zones, but it's only going to go so far.
Yeah. And there's only so much time in a week for us, lately. So that's a real challenge. I think about the things, like, because I've recently added a new hobby / interest, it's like I'm rebalancing everything, and I'm like, where does it all go? Like, how do the days, they just pass? Like,
now we've had our justification,
our confessional,
our confessional, and everyone's probably shaking their heads like, I'm not buying it. But I think, on air production note for both of us is, I will admit to you now that I think our game selection moving forward, well, we've said this before, probably it's been 8 years or something, almost 8 years, but has it been? I don't know. How long has it been? 400 episodes, I'll say.
Yeah, it's been almost 9 years. Yeah, we started in March of.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. What are we doing? Yeah, I just think, like strategy and tactical games, for instance, right? Like, I'm gonna have a lot more scrutiny over. We need to play them for the podcast, but I think I need to think more about balance. There's something to be said for those,
or how 16. We can supplant them in some way. Like you said, bringing in somebody who's
maybe we try some format change.
Yeah. In order to accommodate it. Yeah,
JRPGs or long RPGs are the same challenge we've talked about. And
yep.
I mean, how long have I been streaming?
Well, what year is it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the year of ruin.
Yeah, there you go. It's Tim's year of ruin. Yep, there you go.
I just got the Yeti. I'm so excited.
I know. I think I got the Yeti. I think you've done some things I haven't, but I think I got the Yeti back then. So anyway, all right. Well, let's touch on just a couple more topics. We did touch on the manual. Was there anything else about the manual you wanted to cover?
Oh, well, no, I think, it actually will come up in my takeaways, ironically, but I did, as I often have been doing with my self-prescribed approach to some of this stuff, like I did with in the past, I tend to look at the manual late in the series rather than start with it because I enjoy that kind of discovery phase. So I looked at it finally after playing some more, but I agree with you. You said earlier, it's like the manual was very kind of like just descriptive more than it was about like gameplay. There's just like this, these are the things that it does. The thing I appreciated about those was it was nice to see because I didn't get the hours to spend with the game that we should have. It was nice to see like I haven't used every type of castle, right? So I haven't seen every tech tree for each type of castle. And even seeing it in the game, they don't represent it in a tech tree, but in the manual they do. And so even, I'm a visual learner, as I've said and before. And so seeing it in a tech tree format, not that they're deep tech trees, but it was just nice to kind of see it that way, seeing the different castles. Let's see, I had
all the stats are there for the
all the stats. There's
there's
a reference card as well that came with the GOG version. So the reference card's kind of neat because you see everything all the units laid out by hero type. And then things like trading, like I guess that's maybe a multiplayer thing, but there's like a trading screen that you can go to where you trade between heroes, or maybe you do that when you have two different. I guess you do that when you have two different heroes you want to give an item to.
Right. I think it's yes. You could have.
So I just never did that.
You can have a hero who's outgoing and trying to find as many artifacts as they can, and you can
give them to other people.
Give them to other heroes.
Yeah, and that's cool. So it's just like
which is a thing that I didn't know you could do. But yes, I saw that as well when I was like, oh, I missed this. When I was reading the fiction a little bit, I was like, what? I was going back to look for the ransom specifically, and I was like, oh, look, trading. So
yeah, exactly.
I came across it that way. So
yeah, so it's not necessarily fair to the time or the game to have be a critical point about this, but it's just stuff that didn't present itself in the game that was really only in the manual, unless you happened upon it, so yeah, anyway, it's just it was a reminder that'll come up in my takeaways, but it was nice to see some of the depth there that I didn't know was there. And being a lore person, I did appreciate the letters.
Good.
And was surprised to see that they were nearly a third, if not more than the
they were a lot. There was a lot of text in those letters. I kept going through it like maybe there's some strategy in further in. Nope, no, there was not. I did one other thing I was thinking about as far as this in a board game. a big distinction with a board game is that you could play a board game once with friends who know the game, and you'll pick it up and you'll have a better strategy the second time you play. This is a game, because you can't really see what the enemy's doing. I mean, they're moving very quickly, at least, here, in this kind of DOS version. I don't know if that was true back then. I mean, the DOS box running on very accelerated computers compared to then. So I don't know if they're moving a lot faster than they did in the time, but it's really hard to understand. Some of it is opacity, but also just it's hard to follow what they're doing and like divine the strategy that the enemy players use. And they may not approach it like another human player would either. So I can imagine, and we've had some emails, and we may get to them tonight about. I think I've heard this too from maybe on Twitter, which I'm a reminder to those who've not seen this. We're closing it down at the end of the month. But that hot seating, this game with friends was a fun way to play. And I could totally see that because, of course, then you're all kind of getting better at the same rate.
It's social.
It's a social thing, but also like skill wise, you're all kind of learning strategy at the same time. And so the game deepens for you the more you play, and you have the social bonding that I think would support that as well. All of which I think is good. I think that's really hard to replicate in the single player campaign or even sort of, I forget what they called it, but the sort of standard game, I guess is what they called it. It's hard to get to that. And the standard game is not presented in a way that feels organized to teach you those things either.
Yeah. I mean, we also didn't play multiplayer, which I think it has, right?
It does, and we talked about it, I think, in the first episode, and then it just kind of fell off both of our radars.
Yeah, I just dawning on me now, but I can see this being, I mean, sort of, again, to that board game communal kind of like competitive feel. I can see that this would probably be a pretty fun multiplayer game, especially if you were co-located somewhat, like LAN party style.
Sure. Or even just playing on the same PC, that's
yeah.
It supported that.
Oh, it did? Wait, what do you mean?
You could play a hot seat multiplayer on one PC. That's what I meant by hot seat.
Oh, you mean swapping? I thought you meant playing the same.
No. Each playing your own character. Yeah.
I see. Okay, yeah. Okay, well that's cool. Yeah, that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Especially for the time.
Yeah, and probably a good way to play.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you'd all be screen peeking and figuring out what the other person is doing.
It's like playing. Yeah.
I see what your strategy is, So, but you'd all have the same level of information, and again, you'd have more transparency, right? So it'd be, I think, valuable.
That's when the metagaming begins.
Yes,
you think you know my strategy, but I'm fainting this way. It's the diplomacy angle.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, yeah, because you're gonna team up against me. I see how it is. I see what you're like, Longo. All right. Well, let's. Do you want to talk at all about the future?
Let's hit that before takeaways. Yeah,
and then go to takeaways.
Yeah, I was just I didn't have time nor funds to just buy the most recent one, which is 7. But so I did do a little dabbling just on YouTube to watch some playthroughs, and I kind of just wanted to see like where did things go this many years later. And the funny thing, talk about 8 in a second, because they do have a teaser trailer out for 8, which is apparently coming out next year. So this franchise is still alive, and Ubisoft is publishing it. But 7 obviously has full playthroughs, and I watched the campaign playthrough for a big chunk. I sped through some of it, but a big chunk of the Sylvan campaign in 7, and it's just interesting to see how the blueprints really haven't changed. The production. So it's full 3D, of course.
Of course.
The overworld map is 3D, but as far as I could tell, I don't think that there's necessarily it's not as turn-based. You're kind of just free moving around along roads and stuff, and then the combat is turn based, but kind of the exploration is not. Um, but the grid is the same. It's just got a kind of an isometric camera on it, but it's still a square grid when you're doing combat. The depth of the grid is pretty much the same. There could be a log or a rock in the middle of the way, but it's just a bunch of squares like a chessboard or a checkerboard. Um, but of course, production values are higher, effects are higher, and it looks cooler, and there's a lot more going on. Audio's awesome, music's awesome. They have this great presentation of the story where they have these. I guess it's the heroes themselves are sitting around this table with this with the overworld 3-dimensional map in the middle of the table. Like they're watching, almost like they're gods, right? They're watching this and they're planning. And then the elven character starts telling a story about this other hero. And that's the campaign. And so he's voiceovering, like he's narrating it. It's very cool. I thought it was very clever. And so he's like, the king is like, tell me the story of this ancient hero or whatever from the past. And so the elven person starts talking and it zooms into the table, where the 3-dimensional map is, and that's the map. They zoom into this little island. So I thought it was a very clever presentation. And I mean, it looks, production values do work on me sometimes. And,
Sure.
And, they're definitely the tech trees are deeper. The castle screens are pretty much, other than fidelity being higher. In fact, they might have even been 2D, to be honest. But rendered in 3D, but
right.
But 2D
sprites,
yeah. But they just look really good. But as far as like the flow of them, it's just like what we played. So I think my summary is that I was very, other than some clever presentational things and production values and 3D, I was very surprised about how religiously similar it is to this game. However many years later, 7 games later, and that is, I think, we've talked about this in the past on this series and others, where you have these old franchises and that really big conundrum, having hit that conundrum myself a couple times now, in my day job, that conundrum of how much do you change with a franchise to make it evolve, whether you're trying to get new audiences or not, or whatever your goals are, is a very difficult challenge to do. And it's very interesting to see that both a blessing and a curse for this game, or this franchise, I'll say, is that they've stuck to their guns, but maybe at their own peril too, as far as like, it's still seems very niche, and they really have never really broken out, I'm sure, of, they probably, and RTSs are kind of famously known for having a very clear ceiling for an audience. Like we kind of know how many RTS players there are in the world. And so any RTS game has to plan for that. And I think for this franchise, it's the same thing probably. So Ubisoft probably knows those numbers and says, well, we're going to get probably X number of people if we keep it this way. And they seem to have chosen to keep it this way. But you watched the 8 trailer. What are your reactions to 8? Because I feel like they're changing some things there.
My initial reaction is definitely some of the prettiness. I mean, there does seem to be a lot of sort of effects that maybe are making use of the hex grid. It is a hex grid rather than
they changed the hex for one thing.
So and you can see more clearly. It feels like there's a little bit more units, not tons more. But the way they're being used is, it seems like there's more attacks that will attack sort of things in a line and things like that. So it seems like there's a little bit more, like, try to find a way to make the most of your attacks. Like I only realized after using them for a while that the Cyclops, for example, could attack 2 in a row if they were lined up a particular way, which was really was a cool thing. That they also move so slow that I often, the Cyclops didn't come into play very often. They were kind of there, and if something attacked them, they were tough to take out. But they had a tendency to not be a major factor in the victory. All the ranged attacks seem to be the way to go. So yeah, it's things like that I picked up on. Definitely way prettier, and it felt like they, doing some stuff with trying maybe to tell a story with video. You know,
Yeah, and they have a lot of that. In 7, they had a combination of these pretty economical 3D videos where they didn't have like character animation. It was just like cameras looking at models as they were at the table, and then
mm.
they had the sort of graphic novel approach too for some of their stuff.
Yeah.
So
Anything else you picked up on?
well, I just the hex grid as an example, it was much more of a miniatures game in
Right.
eights, and again, we're just looking at a teaser trailer, so I just wanted to see the state of the art, and now I'm kind of like I'll probably keep a side eye on its launch next year. It's a new developer as well from the past couple, so they're probably trying some stuff out. And to be honest, it looked more mobile friendly to me in some
Mm,
ways too, which
mm.
I'm just totally making up. I don't know if that's the case, but and what I mean, like streamlining some things. The thing I forgot to say about 7 though, which I thought was hilarious, and another weird thing that I don't know. I guess it's just part of this franchise. But in 7, on the grid, the battle grid, the hero is still not a part. Like they're off. They're still off the grid, like in the back, just watching the battle happen, and then they can still do spells and like attack kind of from a distance. But it's still this weird like the hero's not in the
Civil
battle.
War, Civil War general type thing.
Yeah, they're in the back, and all their units that they've collected are doing all the work, and they do spells and and have like sort of attacks, but why not just move them onto the battlefield? It's just such a weird thing. But you know, when you're looking at the franchise, there's a list of things that you want to keep probably,
Yeah.
and it's one of its tropes. So I don't
It's
know.
hard to know how to add and remove to something at that point as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's a tricky, it's a
They have a
sticky widget.
formula.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, they have an audience that is probably wanting and demanding a certain consistency, right? They just want things to more particles and things. But I don't know. It's a fascinating franchise. I'm glad we played it. I think both wish we had time to go deeper, but I'm glad I finally played one of these because it's definitely informed me in the sort of subgenre a lot more than I thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't regret playing it. As I said last time, I do think there's a good game here that I just don't have the time to appreciate. I think this would be like the only game I played for 6 months to really get it.
Yeah.
And I'd have to be able to consistently play like a bunch, maybe some every day or every other day to get there. So it's just too big a commitment for me right now. So let's turn then to takeaways. It is, it's what we do at the end of a series. I don't know. It's going to be kind of interesting to have takeaways from a game that we're both confessing, wow, this is more than we could play. So we'll have to try to, I don't know, think about how we frame those for that. But go ahead and give me your first one. We may have some overlap here as well.
Well, yeah, and I think for me, my takeaways are a little bit snarky, but there are things I've talked about during the 3 episodes anyway, so there won't be surprises. But also, I guess to your point of giving them kind of context or framing, my takeaways, which I think often my takeaways are coming from this approach, is for me they're real takeaways. Like, how would I apply something that I learned from playing this game to me as a developer? You know what I mean? Things that I want to kind of like, oh, I didn't think of that. I should consider that in the future, right? Or whatever. Not that I would make one of these games, probably. I probably will never get a chance to, but there's still themes that, especially in design, can be somewhat universal. So that's just to frame it. They're kind of like, what's a lesson that I learned? Even if I played it as little as I did, there's still things can be learned. So my takeaways won't be about the depth, of the game. So my first one, which I joked about last time, is I'm just calling the Jurassic Park effect, which I quoted last time, and it a lot of my my takeaways generally kind of revolve around the board game kind of theme we've talked about. And in this one, it's just, the kind of conundrum of, Jeff Goldblum's famous quote in there. He had many of them, but the one I'm speaking to is, they were so worried about whether they could do something, they didn't think about whether they should do something. And in this case, it's like, yes, they've translated a board game to a computer game with great effectiveness, great effectiveness and efficiency and all of that. But once you do that, there are certain assumptions you're making about what should and shouldn't be shared with the player in the game versus in another place, because you don't have the board, you don't have, you're basically, okay, you've translated a board game to a computer game, but is that what you should have done? Maybe you should have made a computer game that was inspired by a board game and not be so, I don't know, religious about that sort of transformation, even though this wasn't technically based on a specific board game, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, okay, now we can have a menu accomplish this goal that you would have had to have done with a deck of cards on the table. And isn't it so much faster? It's like, well, it is faster because it's a menu and I can use a mouse, but it's less usable because it's buried and opaque and I don't understand how it works. You know what I mean? So
right.
That it's just something that kind of reminds me to take that into account, moving forward.
Yeah, I think to the sort of latter half of that point, my first one I just said is clarity is to my taste, but clearly not to everyone's, because there are people who love this,
right?
And I don't say that in a denigrating way. I'm just like recognizing, often how I respond to games are my taste. And, I think, to your point about what I take away for the day job, I should bear in mind always, I think it's kind of unspoken to some degree, but one of the things I think you do well in our day job is to say, well, here are the types of players we expect to play our game. So when you think of your feedback, think of who your feedback is supposed to serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of our intended players. And I think I have a tendency as a player to say, well, this is what I want, right? Because I'm not a designer trying to solve a problem for a specific player audience. Usually I'm an engineer trying to solve a problem for a designer or another programmer on occasion. So I kind of have a different lens on game development in that way. But I do think it makes me think about, well, okay, yeah, but I have to always think, sure, that's my taste, but is the game accomplishing what it seeks to do? And is that a valid thing to seek? And, so the fact that this is a sort of game that is going to take you a while to get your teeth into, is clearly to some people's taste. They are making the 8th one, so they still think there's enough of an audience out there to justify higher budgets and things like that. So there's still something out there, and you have to think of that player base. I'm trying to think of what the version of this game is for me, and it's probably one that has less map strategy, because one of my other points is I actually like the tactical map game quite a lot. And I would love like a tree where it's like I'm making decisions at nodes on a tree, sort of like, I don't know, Slay the Spire or something, where I'm like, I'm just doing these tactical battles and then making grander choices where the decision I'm making is much clearer. Like I can see, if I choose to go this way, I'm going to have these things in my future. If I choose to go these ways, I have these things in my future. Yeah, that's kind of a separate thing, but it's because I like the clarity, and it's taking so long for me to get to a remedial understanding of what's happening on the game board, that I struggled the most with this game. So, but it's a taste thing. Like I said, I think there's a really good game here. It's just a thing that's not to my taste.
Yeah, that's one thing we're always going to struggle with on the podcast, because we're doing this for fun.
Yep.
Or whatever we're doing. My second one, again, I already caveated all these are a little bit snarky, but my second one is put it in the manual. And that's just a snarky way of saying, and I guess it kind of partners well with all three of these partner well together, but with my previous one of there it's actually two sides of the same coin, because when we talked about both of us experiencing the manual, which of this era, the manual was pretty critical to a video game. It still was, and that was very much like the tutorial, for instance, is in the manual.
Yeah.
But whatever the equivalent, like, there are other ways to present the information. And the way that I pull this into takeaways for my own is, say, for instance, a tutorialization during a game, right? Like, there's different ways to do that are more player centric, and there's different ways to do that are more developer centric. And we tend to always want to try to be player centric and making it more of a fluid kind of, you learn it before you realize it kind of approach, versus I'm going to pause the game, I'm going to show you a thing, you're going to read it, and then you're going to go do that thing, which is not my favorite. But sometimes a crutch, sometimes it's your only option. But those are the manuals of today. But there's different ways to do that are more player focused. And the funny thing about the manual here is that it was very good if you kind of extrapolate that out to tooltips in Heroes of Might and Magic 8, which they'll have that, right? That are just kind of dynamic. What are the kinds of information you're going to tell the player when is a really critical, process. And this manual had a very specific goal of telling you what everything did, but it didn't really give you the how part, it had the lore stuff, and it had stats, and it had a lot of data, I guess. And like you said, what buttons and menus do. But if you read it, you don't really get a sense of what the game is, I think. So you kind of have to put both of them together, which, makes some sense. But it was just interesting to see how they approached that, when the game, I think, needed some other ways to give the information it should have to you.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'll kind of pair that with what was my third point, which is the campaign maybe needs more ramp. I really wanted some levels that were simpler, that I could see everything easier that was happening. They didn't even need to be less challenging in terms of difficulty. I just wanted to be able to see the effects of choices I was making that I didn't necessarily always know I was making. To be able to actually see the other player not approach a farm for a while because they didn't have a big enough army yet, that they waited until week 2, so that I could see, maybe I should have waited and not fought that and just built up my army for a while, and instead be going after resources first, that's a thing I sort of learned, but only after I had made many mistakes. And it would have been interesting both to see that, or also to see, well, when do you want to go for that thing that's closer to your enemy? When do you want to try to take over a town? How do you tell that your enemy is maybe a little overextended? How are you making the larger strategic choices? Would have been nice to see on smaller maps early on, like onboarding. Basically, onboarding and tutorialization. It didn't have to be necessarily super handholdy. It just needed to be not the whole game at once. This is like, playing chess, but there's not just the, whatever, 8 pieces, 16 pieces. There's hundreds of pieces, because there's all these different types of heroes, or there's these 4 types of heroes, and they all have their own unit types. And yes, that's all in the manual. But like, when I'm actually playing the game, the amount of thinking I would have to do, and like referring back to the manual, which also not easy to do when you're playing in DOSBox, because it's just not set up for alt tab and things like that. It does not handle it well. You're always coming back, and now it's a quarter of the screen, and you hit alt tab again, and then you have to enter, and now you've done something, and it's like a mess. So it's a pain to do, and that's why I don't typically have the PDFs open at the same time. So yeah, I just wanted something where I could see more of what the game was doing on a smaller scale. Just me and another hero who I could see, or another enemy I could, to make these decisions. And it wouldn't have had to be tons of them, but more maps where I could see things that were going on, so I could understand, oh, he went after this person because, like, he saw him go for a farm and lose or whatever, I don't know what that would look like, but that's what I wanted. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if the campaign element of it was maybe something that was a little bolted on too, because it felt like it was utilizing. I don't know. I don't know if they if it was the main spine of the game as they were developing it, or because it feels like this when you start a standard game, there's a lot of options there and a lot of variability and stuff. So
right,
maybe I think, well, definitely watching 7 gameplay, the campaign's become much more crafted and and do what you're saying, right? There's
it has a story,
gradual onboard.
Yeah, right. Like any real time strategy game, that I can remember playing is like, yeah. So back to you for your final.
Yeah, my final one. I just, again, snarky. Board games can be fun, and what I mean by that is,
can they, Tim?
Well, it's like like we talked about in the series. It was an era where there was this, because computer games, especially that had a lot more of the strategy games on them than say consoles. Computer games were really, it was early days enough to where the people who loved board games, especially strategy and tactical board games, were obviously going to be some of the people that were going to get into computer games, especially become developers. And it's a very natural, like I do like the game and I see the potential, like we both said. We just regret not having enough time to play through more deeply. And there, as much as you think about something like Civ or XCOM these days, those are real, that we've gotten to the point where they are clearly video games, and they have influences from board games, deep down or what have you, but they've kind of created their own space in a way. Even though they have even whatever Warhammer, right? Like, is a board game that has influenced so many computer games over the years, especially tactical ones. And so for this game, it was just a nice reminder that even though my first point was about how tricky it is when you do the translation, the concept of taking a board game mentality and putting it into a computer game or video game, there's a lot to learn there. And I am not as big of a board gamer as you or Andrew or people like that. So I don't play them enough. I don't have enough people to play them with. But when I do, I'm always appreciative of the lessons I learn design-wise, even about how hard they are to design. But when a good one comes around, you can really appreciate it. And there's just some great things you can see that they took from board games to apply here. And of course, like the Jurassic Park effect, they may or may not have landed as far as clarity goes, but the thought there was, I thought, a good thing, and it was nice to have it translated for me, so I can see the instinct, the design instinct, and appreciated it.
Yeah, for sure. My final point, I guess, will sort of reflect back on something I touched on a little bit earlier, which is that I did actually quite like the strategy of the tactical map. Sort of once you're actually fighting another force, I actually like that. I thought it was quite interesting. It had way more depth, and we talked about it, way more depth than I expected, and could find myself learning and getting better at that actually pretty quickly, like starting to understand and like know whether I would want to approach another hero based on the armory I had, and then once I had them, what I would do. I didn't quite have all the units understood in terms of what I should be attacking first, but I was feeling myself getting better there, and I found that part of the game I really particularly liked. even attacking the castles was not. While that's a little trickier because you don't control the catapults, so you don't know where it's going to break through first. So you're kind of putting your guys in position, hoping that this thing that only moves 1 or 2 spaces is going to be close enough to an opening to get through pretty quickly after. But in general, I found those really approachable and had the possibility to know enough that was going on. They are pretty transparent, but with the exception maybe of what spells the other person has, you kind of discover that, I think, by the fight. I don't know if you can know that going in, but other than that, I mean, I feel like all the information is there, and you can make choices based on what you're seeing. And I found myself using my sort of fodder characters to protect other characters and things like that in a way that felt compelling. So I think there were parts of the game that because I was engaging well with those, I just wish I could engage well with the sort of higher level of thinking on the overall game. But I did enjoy those quite a lot. So like I said, I think something where the much more strategic layer was a lot thinner, a lot less, a lot fewer decisions with this kind of style of play in between. I think I would totally go for that. And I mentioned Slay the Spire because I don't think it's different, but it sort of has the same sort of feel. So though that's a card based thing, it's kind of what I would be going for. It's like, I want to just make this kind of these broad choices, but not okay, I can move 20 steps. So which 20 steps am I going to take with my hero? This little army I'm pointing around. So yeah, those are mine. So there we have it. We're almost at an hour already. So much for getting to all the emails, but maybe we should at least get to a few. That is us wrapping up Heroes of Might and Magic. Sorry for those who wish we could give this more than we can. We just have the time we have, so we'll have to leave it there. But let's try to get to some emails. We'll do at least a couple, maybe a few. We'll see how many we can get through here. So go ahead and tackle the first one there, sir.
Okay, proper nouns in games. Oh, mystery dip.
Of course.
Okay, here we go. Hey, Brett and Tim. Quick dev question. There's thousands of games out there with their own worlds. But no matter how creative people are, there's essentially a finite combination of letters and words to make proper nouns. You're telling me. Some are more notable or associated strongly with one IP or another, but I'm sure there's hundreds of games with the sewers or a port town. I know you are not lawyers, and this is not legal advice, but what has been your experience when naming things in the games you've worked on? Obviously, some games have their own pre-built lore to pull from, but when you need a new name for a person, place, or thing, is there research or debate or surveying before it gets named? Regards, Mystery Dip. P.S. I wonder if this explains why so many things are X of Y, in quotes. It seems like it would be a lot quicker to greenlight Land of Dragons than Dragonland.
It's true.
Mystery Dip.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole aspect of trademark law and how that works internationally that I'm not even going to begin to understand, nor do I care to. And thank goodness there, tend to be people who take care of those sorts of things. I do remember being at Bethesda when Notch had a game he was making called Scrolls, and Bethesda sued, or ZeniMax, the parent company, had to sue for trademark infringement because that's how you have to protect it. If you don't protect it, you lose it. So anybody could then make an Elder Scrolls game. That's why those things happen, is because and then they work something out, I believe, but you have to sue. Therefore, I guess I should say, there definitely is work done, at least at that level, to investigate what is the story with with whatever title you're proposing to call your game. And there are a lot of commonly used words in games, particularly in certain genres. You mentioned, Dragonland or whatever. Dragon is one that shows up. There's a Dragon Age, and I'm sure there's many Dragon games. King of Dragon Pass, etc. So those are things that have to be figured out. If you're working with a license, obviously it's different, but it's there are people who go and figure out what they can call a thing. Tim, you probably have more direct experience with that than I do, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, naming is quite an interesting process for sure on all levels, and I mean, I won't have time to go into all of it, but to your point and to Mystery's point, I guess I'll distill it down somewhat in that there's two sort of there's two vectors here. One is the legal one, which is a lot easier to talk about and clearer in that, I've been both, I guess I'll call it lucky, but it sometimes can be unlucky to have worked at big enough companies where they have groups that take care of this for you. So if you have something that you need to make sure is going to work from a competitive standpoint or a legal standpoint or even a geopolitical standpoint, there's departments that do that. So I've been very lucky on that. On the creative side, though, and I guess I'll say branding side, that's where it gets a little bit trickier because it does come down to very subjective gut check, and you can do analysis. But the example I'll give, which is the first one that comes to mind, is when we were naming the new big mode in Halo 5, which was called Warzone. The naming process for that, because it's such a generic word, Warzone. But I've also been lucky in that many of the games I've worked on were parts of franchises where when you put the franchise in front of it, whatever it is, you are okay, right? Because it's Halo 5 Warzone, right? It's like we called it Warzone. Other games had used Warzone before. Another big game after that game came out called Call of Duty now uses Warzone, and people have forgotten that Warzone was a thing in Halo 5, right? So,
lesser known title, admittedly. Called, what'd you say?
Yeah.
Call it something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, there, to your point, Mystery, I've been in many rooms where we have run out of words that make enough sense to name a thing.
Yeah. I wasn't in those rooms, to be fair. So,
well, it's funny that he brings it up and that he's identified it on, from his perspective, because it's a true thing, and it's kind of maddening, because I mean, imagine trying to name a big battle mode, right? Like you're on a whiteboard and you have battle, you have battlefield, you have battlefront, you have zone, war zone, you have war face, you have
battle zone,
you have battle zone, so it's true because I've generally worked in a few different genres, so it's kind of the same rut, I guess. But yeah, getting outside of that rut is very hard. But but I mean, his examples like the sewers or Port Town, that's more of kind of a creative thing of like, do you want to name something to be more memorable to players, right? The other side that I could also talk to your ear off, and I already am talking your ear off on, is that, and this is something that I personally ran into a lot with, especially Halo, is that I also think you have to be careful with overthinking things when it comes to naming things, because especially with Halo, which is very, very deep lore and has proper nouns for everything, and some of them are very similar to each other. And, if you make things too opaque with your naming, people will not remember too. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, they did a smart thing, which we probably talked about on our Halo series when it comes to how they named their enemy units, elite, grunt, blah, blah, blah. But, eventually those species got real names, the Sanheli or what have you, right? And it's like the further you go down that hole, the more people you're going to lose because you get really lore focused, So it's kind of it's fun to get into that stuff if you like that stuff, but it also starts alienating people. So anyway,
so to speak.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I won't leave you.
Ungoi. I couldn't remember the name of the grunts. They're called Ungoi.
Ungoi. Yeah.
I think Ungoi.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I did look that up at the time just so I could read it out in an intro. Because I certainly did not remember it. Yes, well, I will leave us stranded in the combat zone and walk to Bedford's Die alone and go to this email from Jeffool. The subject is machinima, which I believe is in response to something we must have talked about a while back. He says, just a quick note. My understanding is that the first several seasons of Red vs. Blue were actually all done in-game the old-fashioned way, on Xboxes in the Halo game, with a capture card for the director view. They added voices in post-production. Eventually, the team went to newer and PC versions, even remastering the earlier work with, I assume, better recording tools. Maybe then they had actual in-game tools from the developers at this point. I don't know. But Tim is probably thinking of demo recording that Quake offered, which was also a big machinima tool at the time. It recorded 3D data similar to what Brett mentioned from Tacoma's 3D in-game cutscenes. You can actually still find and play Quake demo files .dem from nearly 30 years ago. More modern games to include 3D game recording are GTA 5 and PUBG, and of course Halo Infinite's theater mode. So there you have it. Some clarification on how some things were done in machinima in the early days. I do not recall how this came up.
I don't remember either. I mean, it might have came up even with The Sims, right?
It might have, yeah.
There was some machinima going on there. Yeah, I mean, I think he might be right on the original Red versus Blue stuff, but he is. I don't know. I mean, there definitely is and was. Trust me, it's a feature that was hotly debated as far as work that goes into it. It might have been Halo 2 where the record mode was built in. And it wasn't used by everybody, but it was used by the real obsessed folks. And it was it did allow them to do machinima more easily.
Yeah.
And I do remember the Quake stuff too.
And it was available for the first game. You may recall our interview with Halo, that when they did the initial reveal at whatever Macworld or right, that they had used their, I mean, that was not, I think, a feature in the product, but they had the technology, so I would not be surprised to hear that it learned that rather it came about in later games that it was available.
Yeah, they gave it a user interface and stuff, right?
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah, but yeah, he might be right on the for the first couple seasons and stuff. That was kind of part of the charm, is that they were doing it in the actual game and cutting it together. Yeah, those early ones were very fun.
Yeah, they were pretty funny. I can remember a wasted afternoon at work watching those. So thanks, LucasArts, for the internet connection. Enjoyed it. All right, why don't we hit one more apiece and then we will call it.
Okay, The Sims from Father Beast. The Sims is often about the stories that happen while you were playing, so I thought I would tell you a couple of stories we had.
These are good. So that's in yeah.
Okay.
In fact, we got June also thinks they're.
Yeah, I was going to say sorry for June's coming into the background there, making her cameo, barking at nothing. When we got The Sims, me, my wife, and our son and daughter started playing. We used the money cheat immediately, and I don't think anyone ever played the game legitimately. There was only 5 or 6 lots available, so we had to crowd in. Oh, they were all in the same neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
One day, my 11-year-old son bulldozed all of our houses during his playtime, essentially evicting all of our families. We banned him from playing The Sims for a week. When he got back on, he made a pool that filled the entire lot, then used this mod we had, which would teleport neighbors to your lot. He then brought everyone in the neighborhood to his lot and took away the ladders while they were in the pool, essentially murdering everyone. We banned him from The Sims permanently after that.
If you need to reach Father Beast's son, by the way, we will get the address for Arkham Asylum. where
Yeah.
we believe he's receiving email.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. There's some something's coming out there. A quick anecdote before I read the second example. If you are following it, the Sims movie is greenlit and is in progress. Margot Robbie's production crew or production company is doing it. So with the Barbie success, I think it's going to be awesome. They have confirmed that they will have pools with no ladders in the movie.
Oh dear.
And they confirmed a bunch of other like kind of jokey things that people did in The Sims that became infamous. So they clearly know the franchise. So I'm hopeful. It's going to be a weird movie, but okay. Second one. I was reading in the manual that without walls, your house is just furniture on your lawn. Okay, so I decided to do that. I knew a person had to have privacy to use the bathroom, so I built the bathroom, but everything else was just sitting out there. My character would be sitting there watching TV, and visitors would maneuver past him and the couch and ring the doorbell on the bathroom door. Then he would get up and talk to them.
That's hilarious.
I'd put a staircase next to the bathroom wall and then put a floor that extended over the whole lot. Oh my God. I had my bed up there. No walls up there. No walls at all up there. It looked like some weird umbrella in the neighborhood view. Oh my God, Father Beast. Well done. Well done. Yeah, I mean, thank you for writing in, because that's exactly what The Sims is. It's just story generator.
For sure. Yeah, I love the idea of the floor. I mean, it sounds like an abstract architecture thing. Like you make, I mean, wasn't there an architect who made like a literal glass house that you could see in? I can't remember. And he lived in it, I think. But no, I don't think anybody else has ever really lived in it because it was so weird. And the only privacy was the bathroom. So you can imagine if you did that and then there was like, but it actually floated, maybe on like, some kind of glass pylon or something like that, reinforced in some way, maybe thin metal, and then had an elevated, second floor that was where all the living was actually done. I could totally imagine that as a modern art sort of thing. So, it's inspirational. We'll see if we can get some of that built. And I hope you get enough visitation time with your son, Father Beast. Anyway, email 2 here on my side is from Ashton Herman. The subject is Lords of Magic. Hey, Tim and Brett. I'm really excited to hear your discussion around Heroes of Might and Magic. And even though I never played the series, it's got me itching to give the 4th game a shot, as I hear it's the very best one. As a kid, I'd spend a lot of time in stores with my dad just browsing through the computer games and trying to find the next one I'd save my money up for or ask for as a birthday or Christmas present. And I have some vivid memories of looking at the Heroes of Might and Magic boxes. While I never got one, I did get Sierra's Lords of Magic for my birthday one year. Lords of Magic was an attempt at fusing Heroes of Might and Magic with Lords of the Realm, and it combined 4X and real-time strategy, with mixed success. Game modes in some interesting ways. I think the game's still a lot of fun to play even now, but I don't think it ever made the impact they had hoped for on the market. What it did have was a frickin' sweet big game box that opened up into a massive 3-pane diorama. I kept that box on my shelf for years just because it was so cool. So I want to know, can you remember any great game boxes from back in the era when, in PC gaming at least, bigger was often better? Thanks as always, Ashton. Any favorite game boxes from back in the day? Yeah, of course. Of course you have one.
Yeah, I wish I kept it, but I'm glad I didn't actually. Because I'm looking behind me, as if people know, I have some of my favorite classic boxes still. Stone Keep. Look it up.
Don't remember that box.
Stone Keep I was so excited about this game and the reason it's relevant to the podcast is it was it was a high fidelity Eye of the Beholder.
Oh, was this the Interplay thing?
Yeah, I think it was Interplay. Yeah, it was super fancy renders and like photoreal looking stuff. The dungeons looked amazing, but the box was this. My memory of the box, I hope I have this right. There was this base, and then like this stone. The box was like this stone thing that came out of the base. So it was like a 2-part box thing, but then in the middle of the stone monolith of the box, there was like this inset picture frame almost and I think there was like a skeleton in there or something. And I have to look it up. But that's the game that I think of when I think of boxes for me. Because I loved Eye of the Beholder games, and when this came out, I was like, oh, this is the future.
Yeah,
and I just bought that on day one, and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I don't remember that game itself holding up particularly well.
No, it didn't.
I do remember the box was cool, or that you said it was cool.
It was also a hologram.
Cool! Yeah.
In the inset was a hologram. Oh yeah, this doesn't have the base part. Maybe I'm misremembering that. No, it's there. There's a base section, and yeah, it wasn't a good game, unfortunately. but the hologram, that was the other thing. Is
but a good box.
Skeleton in the inset was a hologram. Like old school hologram. Oh yeah, here it is. Oh, it's so good.
Let's see. I still have downstairs a Day of the Tentacle triangular prism box. Mm-hmm. So that's a cool one. That it's ridiculous. I don't know why I've kept it, because it just takes up this huge amount of space. I have to have it on top of a bookcase. It's very silly that I've kept this box, but I have. It was the Taki edition of Day of the Tentacle. I had Burn Cycle, which I don't remember much about as a game. I think it was an adventure game that had a real-time element of some kind, like that you could miss things, sort of like some of the more advanced text adventures. So I feel like that was the case. But what the box had was a heat-sensitive cover. So you could lay your hand on top of it, and like a mood ring or something, or other heat sensitive things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would change colors based on what how much of your hand was contacting in different places. So that was pretty cool. I seem to remember Phantasmagoria had a pretty cool cover.
Yeah, I think that was pretty elaborate. Yeah.
I feel like that one was pretty elaborate, but I didn't own it. I remember seeing it at LucasArts. Those are some that stand out to me from the day.
Didn't we have an email, or did we have a guest? No, it was Tony, right? He was talking about that book. There's a book that someone did about about famous about covers. Elaborate boxes. Yeah.
Yep.
So go back, and he was our guest for Trespasser, and he's kind of into game.
Definitely go back.
Preservation.
Yeah, for sure. So and I do remember too, Bill Roper talked about way back when we did Warcraft about them putting extra stuff in the box so it was heavier.
Yeah, like
so it came with the Interplay pad or the Blizzard pad. Right?
Blizzard always had that blank pad of paper. It was like, what am I going to do with this? It's an RTS.
I literally, after we had that interview, I went and found my whatever it was. I guess it was Diablo box, and it had one in it still that I had never used, and I took it out and I used it for like 3 years, and then filled it up and recycled it. So
amazing.
Yeah. So.
And if you look up the Stone Keep box, there were different versions. Some of them were like simplified, but you got to look for the images with the base where it came out. It looks like a tombstone basically, and the base is like the ground. It's brilliant.
Brilliant, he says.
It must have been so expensive and not worth it.
So not for that game. That's the craziest part about it, I think, because I do remember that was not a well-reviewed game. R.I.P., I suppose. All right, well, thank you for those. Those were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We have a handful more. We will get to them soon. There are several about Heroes of Might and Magic, or at least a couple, and then a couple that are quite long. More from Father Beast. So welcome back, Father Beast. We hadn't heard from you in a while, but we're glad to hear from you again. We also love to get your reviews. Haven't had one in a minute. I don't check Spotify, but I do see all the Apple ones. If you're sending them anywhere else, please just let us know and we can track them down, or you can just send them in by email. We're on the web at devgameclub.com. We are now pretty much outside of everything except for Discord, and there's a link for that in our show notes. And my buddy here also twitches at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord, our merch store, link at the Discord, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun hot seating the multiplayer this week, and good night.
Good night.